us so you can digest it later at your leisure. And of course, as Oded has just said, you will be able to hear it at some point. So again, don't worry too much. If, however, I've said something that is a clarity question, and it will be my judgment call, then I'll try and answer it, because that might prevent you from being able to understand what's going on. A little bit about the title. I remember receiving an uncorrected proof of Ellie's book, which eventually came out as The Choice. The original title was Inherent Simplicity, which always struck a chord with me. But I'd like to think from the webinar and what I have to say, you may find that both of us were actually right. The road that I have chosen was a choice, and the way I am continuing with TOCTP is still a choice that I eagerly accept. So maybe we were both right. It's a journey which is a life full of choices, and what follows in terms of the decisions and the conflicts that some of those decisions represent, they're all part of that journey. But they start with that choice. Which road are we to take? And I thank Robert Frost and his poetry for a deeper understanding of a road. So this real webinar is the story of my journey. It's the road I chose and where it's still leading me. So, introduction to Ellie. My first introduction would be in Coventry in 1987, when I first met what I recognized even then was a truly great mind. Just a little bit scary, however. And there was also the awful realization that as I continued with my journey, there was going to be a struggle to know just where Ellie was coming from, and just as often where he was going to. Then the wonderful discovery that I was always going to be able to stand on the shoulders of giants. And there were some pretty big giants then and still are today. Oded, Alex and Mashar and Alex Klarman, Talim, Asboim, Avram Mordach, Eli Schragenheim, but so many more people that I haven't got the time to list today. The US, the UK team, which was seminal in helping me grow my understanding, the gig group across Europe, AGI from around the world, Australia, New Zealand, all the many places across Europe that I've been to. They all stretched me, they taught me, they guided me, they challenged me in the years between 1990 and 2014 when I supposedly retired. But at the beginning of that journey, there was a time when I was asked to sit down by Oded, and he asked me if I would do something. And that was to write my personal FRT. I struggled a little bit with what that meant, but the main lesson I remember from what he had to say was the word I is not in that document. I'm involved in the prerequisite tree, I'm involved in the transition tree, but not in the FRT. And I did this in 1992, and it's something which remains valid even today. It's still with me in all the things that I'm trying to do. And the reason it's important is it is in fact our legacy. It's the bit of our life that remains after we're gone, however that happens to be defined. But first you have to master this process. You had to learn it. You had to begin to understand what it was really trying to say. In the early days, we had positive trees and negative trees. We had all kinds of stuff. It was never easy. Slowly it began to evolve. It demanded time, it demanded effort. Talmudic scholarship, as I was to learn, doesn't just happen. The use of Socratic questioning and examination is a difficult yet always rewarding road to travel, but it's not an easy road. And so to find the inherent simplicity in what I was doing, and I think what we were doing, took hours of time just thinking through what was happening, trusting the tools, mastering the tools, using them every which way you could, in all manner of places. You would read a newspaper and see if you could determine the transition tree in the article. By the way, you end up soon not reading newspapers. You might still be frustrated by what you're doing, but as is often the case, perseverance pays off. But above all, you needed a great team of mentors, the giants noted above, but just as many from outside the world of TOC to both guide and to question. You might not always agree with them, but it's using the tools, both of us. You have a robust debate, and you often, if not usually, arrive at a sound and robust solution. But mastering the tools was never enough. If you were going to run your life using TOCTP, you had to sell. Kevin Fox wrote a very simple article. It came out of AGI in the US. I think it was around 92, might have been 93. It was just a text article, just came out for everybody to have a look at. But he outlined the way to sell TOCTP by the way in which we use the tools in the selling process. And I've used it ever since. As I said, simple yet long lost. I have no idea if it's still around. Later along came spin selling, and that gave ever greater clarity. And with these two combined, selling TOCTP came much more straightforward. There was and still is a transition tree in there, but I simply lived it rather than try to keep writing it down. If you want a transition tree, Robert Bolton in Australia might have it because he sat in on some of my selling visits, but I know I could never really capture it. In the time that I was running the business, I and Jay Munn, I survived 3 recessions and was still relatively successful when I retired. But time had moved on. And anyway, I needed a new challenge. Except I still had to learn one more lesson in order to move forward. Now, I'm sorry to burst a bubble for some, but it's not all about drum buffer rope, CCPM, the Jonah program, replenishment, DDMRP, or any of the other TOC applications. They're all important. I'm not diminishing them. But I found something over the years, both in the work that I've been doing around the globe, but also in the research that I've been looking at, that I had to be honest and say to myself, I'm selling something that cannot, in all honesty, last. Most of the implementations we lead have shallow roots. Yes, we can get short-term success, and in some cases it stays that way for quite a while. However, and this has happened to me on numerous occasions, a new person in the organization can undo all my work and the work of all those inside the organizations that I had taught, and sometimes at a stroke. I've lost count of the number of companies that over the years have either been bought by a much larger one, mainly because of their excellent performance, but in moving to that bigger company, have lost much of what was already good inside them. To me, there is no long-term success in selling TOCTP to organizations. That's a personal view. To my mind, the dominant paradigm of cost metrics, coupled with a new owner or a new top executive, will always have the capacity to stop what we do in its tracks. This is certainly true of the Western economy, but maybe not of emerging economies. However, the TOCTP almost always delivered at the level of the individual person, but this realization took a long time. Strangely, I was given the insight to that way back in that first meeting with Ellie. I was in the EITB and they had gone off and done a major piece of work with Oded and others, really getting to grips with what the goal was all about. So I was familiar with the book. And I remember sitting outside. Ellie was taking a break. We were all having coffee. And I went up to him and introduced myself, said hi. And we got talking about the core message of the goal. And he said, this was the chance remark, it's mainly about the relationship between Alex and Julie and the family. Really? I sat struck by that. I thought it was all about managing the plant, saving the jobs of all the people that work there and the communities in which they live. That's truly a goal worth having. But those of you who know the DVD, but Jonah said no. It wasn't as if I disagreed with Ellie. I have to say I did on a number of occasions and lived to tell the tale. It was more the fact that I missed the point that sound, robust relationships start at home and work out from there, however home is defined. It was only in more recent years that I began to truly understand this, when I recognized the world of difference between looking and seeing, as the contemplatives, the desert fathers remind us. But I had not yet learned to see. I could look, but I wasn't seeing. But it was this chance remark that also drove my doctoral research at Cranfield and led to the book Unconstrained Organizations and the Psychology of Relationships at Work and Home, which led me to personal focus. And for many years, personal focus and drum buffer rope and CCPM were equal bedfellows. But I would have to say that the shift in my use of TOCTP is almost entirely now with personal focus. To be part of someone achieving their goal in life is humbling. It brings its own reward, which is beyond all measure, and it changes you, it changes me and the person I'm traveling with. And in that way, it changes the world. This aspect of traveling with somebody and being able to help them on life journey had been with me long before TOC. It was always part of my goal, but it was fitful. It wasn't properly defined. I had no idea how to do it properly. But I was again fortunate that I was not the first, and people such as Limor and others had already opened the door for me. We should never underestimate the importance of this ability of the TOC and TP to link up and help define how we can help people. We have a set of tools, not the only set, but a set. It's complete. It combines both Socratic and Talmudic understanding, of which more later, which when done well exceeds all expectation. One of the great joys of the last 8 to 10 years of my working life is to see people released from the powerful grip of a conflict of paradigms, from that devastating snare of everything that this world deems important, and to witness them actually recognize and set out for their goal in life. It's both a revelation for them and humbling to me. It's also, I would argue, a place of compassion, of humility, and of humanity. So why continue to use the phrase inherent simplicity? Well, it goes all the way back to the beginning, I guess. And for me, that phrase, or those two words, are the best summation of what Ellie taught me and so many others taught me. Whether it's an application, the Jonah program, personal focus, or whatever we choose to use the TOCTP for, the objective was always inherent simplicity. Our use of the tools could look like that of a magician, the application of a snake oil without the mark of inherent simplicity. Of course, they should exclaim after the work has been done, usually by themselves. But I also see it as the metric of our own mastery of the tools. If what we do when we use the tools, even if nobody else sees it, if it doesn't become simple, if it doesn't just have that inherent simplicity, then our work is not yet done. It means we have to go round the loop again, refining, reflecting, refining, updating, and so on and so on. And for me, it's always been the best accolade that our thinking can achieve when working with someone, as we travel for a while beside them and guide our mentor, is for them to say, of course, they get it. And they've usually done it themselves with some help. And that's why inherent simplicity is never more important than when dealing with a one-to-one relationship. So for me, what we're really looking at is the importance of the process as part of the story. The telling of the story demands both a rigor and cause and effect understanding, if we are to understand. It takes time, as I said before. Story is something which I find fascinating. I've never been a great fiction reader, but I do enjoy a good story. And for over 30 years, I've been fascinated with the ability of TOC to help in capturing and then understanding stories told to me by so many people. It even works with the stories that I read, and in particular scripture. That comes with being a theologian, I guess. It's interesting when you ask people for UDIs. I'm doing some work right now with a company, some really, really great people. And two of the guys have, for some unknown reason, decided it would be a really great idea to do what I call the leadership program. And I asked them for 8 UDIs. And they sent me those 8 UDIs, and I sat and looked at them. But every time I ask for an UDI, I always ask for the storyline for each UDI, and the storyline has got to be about a paragraph. A sentence is insufficient, and 3.5 chapters is way too much. And in each case, almost every time I do this, the UDI I look at and I go, oh dear, causality in the UDI, no, that's, oh, it's actually something happening in the future. And you kind of scrutinize it. I wasn't called a sort of Rottweiler of the TOC for nothing, a logic-a-thorus, as one of my grandchildren called it. But in the storylines, I would find 8 or 9 really, really good UDIs. And I would say to them, as I did to these two, you've got better UDIs in the storyline than you have in the UDI box. So go back to your storyline, start to unpack the story. The story is telling me something. If you want a good UDI, start with a storyline. And sometimes the stories are related to their working lives, and sometimes the stories are related to their private lives, and sometimes there's an interaction. Many years ago, I was working with a guy, and his friend who worked in the same company said, we've got to get him to a place where he isn't doing what he does when he goes home. And I said, why? What's happening? And he said, well, this guy, he goes home, usually about 8:30, 8:45. He walks through the house. He goes to the top of his garden where there's a pool with some fish in it, and he stares into the pool for about half an hour. I said, what's happening with the rest? I mean, is he on his own? No, he's married with children. He just goes straight to it. This is where he dumps the day. We got to the point where, after putting in successfully drum buffer rope to 4 or 5 plants that this guy was managing, he would come in around 7. He would have a glass of wine with his wife, and he would listen to her day. You see, working lives and private lives are not compartments. We only have one life. And whatever happens in one happens in the other. That was back to that chance remark. Yeah, Alex was focusing so much on the plant, he forgot Julie. And that's critical, because we have to get a balance. And so when I'm working with people and getting them to understand the importance of story and how stories can tell us what the undesirable effects are, they start to see something in the process that I'm using which can hopefully unlock them from where they felt they were in their journey in life and allow them to move forward. But we need some kind of robust process. Socratic thinking, for me, roots us in effect, cause-effect logic and the power of deductive reasoning. Talmudic scholarship roots us in rigor, clarity of mind and expression. If you combine the two, if you fuse these two approaches, we have the ability to understand complex situations with a level of ease. But we have to master the tools. Logic is one thing, but if our logic is not telling a story, one that defines a journey, then we're still not achieving inherent simplicity. I looked these up. I'm sure there are many more, but this was, I thought, pretty reasonable for Socratic method from Paul and Elder in 1997. And this is what they described it. Here we can question goals and purposes. We can probe into the nature of the question, problem, or issue that is on the floor. We can inquire into whether or not we have relevant data and information. We can consider alternative interpretations of the data and information. Do you begin to see the categories of legitimate reservation here? We can analyze key concepts and ideas. We can question assumptions. Cloud? being made. We can ask those we're working with to trace out the implications and consequences of what they're saying, NBRs. We can consider alternative points of view. All of these and more are the proper focus of the Socratic question. As a tactic and an approach, Socratic questioning is a highly disciplined process. The Socratic questioner acts as the logical equivalent of that inner critical voice, which the mind develops when it develops critical thinking abilities. I remember both Ellie and Oded invited us all to read The Last Days of Socrates. Not the first time I'd read it, and I had come across it when I did philosophy at Hong Kong University many years before. But it's a really, really good introduction of what was to come. The dialogue between Socrates and Alcibiades, you kind of get an understanding for what this is all about. Talmudic method was not something I was immediately connecting, but I sat in a discussion with Ellie, Alan Leader, my great friend from now in Seattle, before he died. And they were talking, Alan started a conversation about a rabbinic understanding and a Talmudic approach to what Ellie was doing. And they had this really great conversation. And it went on. And I was hanging on with my fingertips to what they were saying. It was one of the few occasions when I actually tried to use some Hebrew, which is never a great idea. But Ellie turned to me and said, you know, what do you think? And I used one of the very, very few phrases that Alan had taught me to use, which was, Ten li lakshov, I'll say, which I hope means, let me think about it. They both looked at me. I didn't know whether they were going to correct the grammar or the pronunciation or what, but they both started to laugh. Hey ho. Now back to Talmudic method. It's a method of text study. Its starting point is the principle that any text that is deemed worthy of serious study must be assumed to have been written with such care and precision that every term, expression, generalization, or exception is significant. Not so much for what it states as for what it implies. This is part of the reason why I take 4 days, as you will see in a moment, 4 days on getting the UDIs right. This is a serious study. And serious students themselves are accustomed to a rigid form of logical reasoning and to the use of precise forms of expression. Talmudic trained scholars attributed the same quality of precision and exactness to any authoritative work, be it of divine origin, scripture, which is what I have done, or the product of the human mind, which is the thinking processes and the work that people bring to me. And there's a logic that underlies this method of reasoning. And it's the very same kind of logic which underlies any sort of scientific research, and by which one is enabled to form hypotheses, to test them, and to formulate general laws. The Talmudic student approaches the study of texts in the same manner as the scientist approaches the study of nature. Okay, so that's that. Moving on. I love the cloud. When I did my research at Cranfield, I had some 135 or more people, 13 companies from around the globe. I ended up with some between 350 and 400 clouds picked up from all of them. They were all doing the Jonah program at the time. And I managed to distill all that down to one cloud, the core conflict of the people. Now, in terms of story, what we have to remember here is that I need to capture the place where the person is. You have to meet people where they are if you want to help. And if I was going to help the people that took part in that research, then whatever analysis I did had to connect to every single one of them. There could be no detachment from it. They had to connect. The core conflict cloud that I found then, of course, was the core conflict of paradigm lock. But a supreme test was to make sure that that cloud, the paradigm lock cloud, connected to every single UDI that I had. And it did. So here, when we're starting to sit with somebody, they have to connect. When we listen to what is being said, whether by one or by many, but in my case today, we're looking at one. all of the UDIs, which apparently seem to be all over the place, all of the storylines, they all have to come back to one. You cannot do this if you're not listening. The rule of Benedict makes it clear. St. Benedict wrote that when we listen, we must do so with the ear of the heart. That means we're not thinking of what we're going to respond. We're not thinking of an answer or a solution. We're not thinking of anything else, but capturing every word that the person we're sitting with is saying. Listening carefully, understanding the stories that the words are telling, and including words not spoken. You can pick up the gestures without words, the expressions that speak volumes. Beautiful. This is where the cloud comes in. One of the things I enjoyed pointing out to Ellie, having read the book by Bach on illusions, the book actually says vaporizing clouds and not evaporating clouds. I tried to explain the difference between vaporizing and evaporating to Ellie. There is a difference, but there we go. Okay, here's something slightly different. I use clouds in a slightly different way, and that's really because I'm also trying to tell the story of what I'm doing, not teach what a cloud's trying to do. And I came up with this idea of using clouds as a set of what I call cameos. You are all familiar, I hope, with what this cloud looks like, but I've redefined it slightly, and I use the term cameo to help me. And cameo can be defined as a short, descriptive, literary sketch which neatly encapsulates something or someone. 4 cameos. Cameo 1, D prime conflict. This is such a rich source of information as to where a person is. I get them to wax lyrical about the actual or perceived conflict in their life, and this tells you so much about where they are. They cannot help staying in the, should I do this, should I do that? I've got to be able to do this, but I've got to do that. And they just keep going, and you just get this wall of DD primes coming towards you. You sit and listen, and you know, this is great. Once they've dumped a fair few of those and you've got effectively a storyline in front of you, I then switch slightly to what I call Cameo 2, Part 1, Part 2. And that we'll see that in a bit more detail in a moment. But it's essentially Cameo 2, Part 1 is the BD structure. Cameo 2, Part 2 is the CD prime structure. And again, as we start to discuss this, they really open up, talking eloquently about the situation they're in without realizing that they're giving you a huge amount of information, assuming you are still listening and not running forward into solution mode. Cameo 3 is the AB coupled with the AC structure. And all 3 of those form a key aspect as to why they're sitting with you. Because they've come to recognize that whatever they say would go into each of those boxes, the A box, the B box, and the C box, is either in danger of being lost, or they're convinced that it is already lost. And then finally, Cameo 4 is the whole cloud. We reset the whole cloud with all of the assumptions in such a way that they're happy that you listened. Cameos tell the story from where I come from. But we're not done yet. Having listened to the story, you can now ask clarity questions. You've captured all this stuff. I'm writing notes. Here you will start to combine both the Socratic questioning coupled with the Talmudic search for rigor and clarity. The story begins to take shape. You begin to understand the journey they're on. That too is taking shape. More importantly, the predicament that they're in also begins to become crystal clear, to you at least, but that needs verification. You will see this, but they probably do not see it with the same clarity. They're still locked in a fog because they're still in Cameo 1. Generally, I found this approach of capturing the story in this way provides the UDIs in abundance. And of course, if you've got the UDIs, you've got the DEs. And just important, the goal is to them, that comes across so much more in this way of storytelling. Which means at the same time, you begin to realize how far away they think that is. And in some cases, even out of reach. So, you've got most of the information, you've got some notes, you've got this idea going. But they've got no ownership. You cannot offer a solution. You cannot offer anything. But now the dialogue changes and you begin to use all of the data that you've captured in the way in which you've captured it, and you feed back the story. And you can use the clouds in the form of the spoken word, as in the telling of a story. I very often might use the CCRT as well, if required, to enrich if I can. And I'm getting them to respond. I want them to intervene. I want them to say, no, that's not what I meant. I said, well, it's what I think you said. Yeah, I know it's what I said, but it's not what I meant. So what did you mean? Oh, well, what I meant was, and they start to add to their own story. And they take over the telling again. So you just rub out what you had and you put in what they say. And this begins to confirm to them that you've listened to their story. Do not underestimate the importance of being heard. This is a place where many people have got used to the idea that nobody listens to me. Now they're beginning to believe that you believe them. And in this way, you begin to earn their trust. Many years ago, John Donne wrote, "No man is an island," and the same can be said of a woman. The human race is created for relationships, and in my work over the last 30 years and more, what I have come across is brokenness, lostness, loneliness, and so much more. The world today doesn't seem to want us to have relationships. It seems to suggest that we can all be individuals living without any connection to those around us, which leads to a number of examples as to the most prevalent cameo. One, a couple which I come across regularly, would be discord versus accord, or maybe let me be versus be with me. And sometimes they bounce between the two. But from my perspective, in what we can do with the TOCTP, I only feel that I have real meaning when I open up my life to others, allow myself to become vulnerable, to be hurt, because only in this way can we be loved. And sometimes that's part of this journey that we're helping them with. This is a journey where we learn an awful lot about humility, where we learn perhaps more about compassion than we would want to. But it's a learning which is never lost. And we learn about what it means to be human, our own humanity. These three indicate that we're living in community with others, and we've begun to live in relationship with others, not just like those like us, but those who need us. We don't have walls in communities. We don't put up barriers in communities. We're all human beings, and we have to learn how to live that way. There is an aspect here of both healing and guiding that the TP can help us with. The TP tools are, for me, the diagnostic that can guide us to where we can be of real value to those around us, not just in monetary terms, but also humanitarian. So let's have a look at it in a bit more detail, give you something to hang on what I'm talking about. You should all be familiar with this structure. I often use little cloudy boxes. Not the first one to come up with this. It was a 5-year-old at Linda Trapno School when Chris Woodhead, then one of the chiefs of education in the UK, came to her primary school where she had been teaching 5-year-olds to do clouds. And it'd be no surprise to learn that instead of nice, neat little rectangular boxes, they drew clouds. And so I see no reason why not. And I will very often play with this kind of diagram. D and D prime, put into this box one of the two choices. When we could be looking at choices, we could be looking at UD versus DE, and so on. Essentially, the structure remains the same. So here we go. This is an example that I was using some time ago. I just happened to have it. It was going to be in a book on discipleship. It never got there, but it's got here. And here we have the story of a father who has 2 sons. And the younger son, yeah, he's looking around and he's saying, you know, my dad's pretty wealthy and I'm pretty bored and I could use some of that money to have fun with my friends, but the only way I can do that is to get it from dad, and he's not likely to give it to me. And even if he did, I don't want to stay here, I want to leave home. So the perspective of the choice before the youngest son, which road is he going to travel, stay at home or leave home? You can't do both. not without certain laws anyway. And so that's it. So what does he do? He goes and asks for his inheritance. Now, 2,000 years ago in the Middle East, the culture would have been that if the younger son asked the father for the inheritance, essentially it means, Dad, I think you're dead, because that's the only way I can have my inheritance. And I want my inheritance now, which means, as far as I'm concerned, now you're dead. And let's not underestimate the power of that. What does the father do? He can give the younger son what he asks for. But this is against all the rules of the community. This is against all the rules of how he thinks families exist, so on and so on. So rather than give, maybe I should refuse to give. And what am I going to do? If I give, what will happen? If I refuse, what will happen? You know, of course, there's an elder brother. He's probably thinking, good, I can get rid of this nitwit of a younger brother. I'll have everything that's left. We can soon grow the farm up. It's pretty profitable. No problem. Why don't you go now, little brother? I don't need you. But that bit isn't in the story. So here he goes. This is the father now struggling with what is going on in this dynamic. What decision am I going to make? If I give my youngest son what he asked for, why would I do that? Well, I want my sons to live their own life. I want them to stand on their own 2 feet. I want them to see the world. You can create whatever kind of story you want. However, I should refuse to give my youngest son what he asked for. Why would I do that? Well, he's not respecting me. He's not respecting my family. He's not respecting my community. And you start to see that the cross connection, that really powerful logical link in every single cloud, give my younger son what he asked for, absolutely shatters any respect within the family and between the family and the community. However, if I refuse to give my youngest son what he asked for, that absolutely shatters the idea that I should let my sons live their own life. The horns of a dilemma, and the father has to make a decision. And of course, as we know, he gives the younger son his inheritance, and off he goes. But there's a price that's being paid here. And this is where cameo 3 comes in. Here we see the price paid by the father. In order to be a good father to both my sons, as recognized in my community, I must let my sons live their own life. However, in order to be a good father to both my sons, I also have to have respect for my family and the community. He's giving up clearly on the respect for family and community by what he's done. And if he gives up that respect for family and community, he's actually giving up everything that he sees as defining what it means to be a good father to both my sons. He's lost his goal, and he's lost a necessary condition. And that's the anguish of the father in the story. He is hurt and hurt deeply, but his love for his younger son transcends where he thinks he should be in terms of the choice that he has to make. It might hurt him deeply, but he lets the son go with the inheritance. That's the road the father has chosen. The younger brother's already chosen his, he's gone. But the story doesn't end there. Because what happens when the younger brother goes off with all that money? He squanders it in rich living and all kinds of stuff. He's got loads and loads of friends, which remain friends until the money's all gone. And now he finds himself sitting here in a pigsty. Not the best of place for a young Jewish boy of 2,000 years ago, but there he is. And he comes up with yet another choice. Do I stay here or do I go home? How can I go home? Gee, that's really going to be, I don't really want to eat the husks anymore. I should go home. And he decides to work out that he's going to go home. He'll seek his father's forgiveness, and he'll work as an ordinary servant, not as the son, as a servant in his father's farm. The ending, of course, is that the father sees the younger son coming, runs towards him, and has a feast. Not for the younger son, but actually just to say, I found my son. It's because the son has returned, not in honor of the son. But what of the older brother? He's not at all happy. Oh, the nitwit's returned. And how can my father run down the road doing what he's doing? How does that come? Perhaps the older brother thought everything would come to him. Who knows? But what we see in the response of the elder son is typical of paradigm lock. There's no way I'm going to rejoice in seeing him come back. He was lost and should have stayed lost. But he's seeing the one that was lost be found. And he cannot accept or forgive the hurt caused to the father and has no forgiveness in his heart. And there lies most of the conflicts I deal with and why I find the TOCTP to be of such value. By the way, if you want more on that particular story, Henri Nouwen wrote an excellent book called The Return of the Prodigal Son. And I'd just like to give proper attribution to Brian Hollingshead, who was a marvelous artist and illustrator, who sadly died. But he really was a great artist. So, a few thoughts on process. There is contained with all of the TOCTP this importance of sensitive dependence on initial condition. This comes out of chaos theory. And David Rouelle is a French mathematician, and he was one of the few that I've not come across it too many other places, but obviously a lot have developed from what Rouelle had to say. I've never forgotten the time, I think it was in Windsor, when Ellie was standing in front of her, and he said, I'm going to talk to you about cows theory. And we're all looking at one another going, cows theory, cows theory. What on earth is cows theory? And he would repeat it, cows theory. Don't you know what cows theory is? Cows theory? Cows theory? And he's like, no. And in the end, I think it was Tony Doughty, who was at the time still was Premier Percussion in Leicester, put his hand up and said, Ellie, what on earth is cows theory? And that's when we realized that Ellie's pronunciation of chaos was chaos, which in the excitement sounded like cows theory. I like the idea that it came from cows, but that's a different thing. So, sensitive dependence on initial condition, highlighting the fact that if the initial condition is not robust, there's no way you can predict the outcome. This is why I spend 3 to 4 days working on UDIs as part of any leadership or journal program. It is not a gimme. Don't think that you're going to learn how to develop UDIs and build sound logical artifact on UDIs that haven't been properly tested. And that means, sorry to bust the bubble on this one, guys, you don't need just a book. You've got to be taught. You have to go to class. You have to learn how to do this. It takes time. I find that if I spend 3 to 4 days working on UDIs and getting the storylines, what I get is a richness and a confidence that the storylines that I've got are really, really going to be the real UDIs. That's what I've got. This is the sensitive dependence. Whether I'm working in an organization or working in a one-to-one, you cannot play games with UDIs. They are the bedrock of everything else that's going to happen. And they have to sit in the context of where we are. They have to relate to whatever you're going to put in the A box, the B box, and the C box. They have to relate to the environment that they are existing in. You cannot extrapolate a UDI from one area into another, rarely. It's critical. If you get that wrong, the solution will not work. That's what sensitive dependence on initial condition means. If you miss something, if you fail to recognize something within the analysis of the UDIs and the capturing of the UDIs that you didn't have before, you're going to miss out. We all have our favorite tool with TP. For me, obviously, with the work I've done, it's the cloud followed by the NBR. Transition trees, they seem to come naturally to me. They never did, but David Marks and I, we were traveling back from our Jonah course. I think it was the second one at Ashridge. And we decided that we had no understanding of what a transition tree was. But we were running the course for IBM. We were running a 4-day course for IBM at the time. And David said, let's go through the course next week. And we started to go through it. And I started laughing after about 8 or 9 miles traveling back to David's town. What are you laughing at? I said, David, you're describing a transition tree. No, I'm not. I said, David, you've just gone up the left-hand side with the actions clearly defined. And you've actually stated on more than one occasion what the outcome of that action is supposed to be, which helps us to then decide that the next action can start. What? I said, sorry, David, but I wrote it down. You were talking in a transition tree about what we, oh, damn. PRTs, they're fairly straightforward, and particularly when coupled with CCPM. Other people have other favorites. But it comes back to this privilege of listening. Do you know, when you're sitting beside someone who is lost, broken, hurting, oftentimes angry, you need to remember that they've come for help and you might be their last hope. And in doing so, they show great courage, great fortitude. Just asking for help is an amazing first step. We're to have compassion for them. Compassion, compati, the Latin root for to suffer with. And in entering where they are, we ourselves become vulnerable. We too share that suffering. We cannot remain detached, because we also bring, in my case, my faith, but also faith in the tools that we have been taught to use to help guide them out of the dark place where we found them. That's why I always say there's often healing taking place at the same time. If you remain detached, you're just standing on the outside looking in. You don't get the storylines, you don't get the causality, you don't get the UDIs and the DEs and the connections unless you enter into. That's what I mean about to suffer with. That's what I mean about being vulnerable. Seeing what we're able to do as a shepherd in the Middle East, searching for the lost sheep and leading it back to the safety of the flock. That's kind of where we are. We're trying to find somebody that's lost their way and bring them back. The people I've met and traveled with have shown in their tribulation and perseverance a real desire to be set free. And this is where our help is most productive. This is where we discover what it means to be human, created to live in relationship, in community. And if I can teach you something of this, then the legacy given to me by the giants is passed on to the giants of tomorrow, and the whole world benefits. So this is perhaps the greatest legacy of Ellie, for me at least. It's through this use of the TOCTP I began to recognize the devastating impact that comes from the conflict of paradigms, and in particular that of paradigm lock, which I still see reverberating around organizations of all types and sizes, from families to the family of nations. You only have to watch the television. You only have to read the newspapers or listen on the radio. You only have to follow Facebook and Twitter. You only have to follow what's happening right now in the US and the way in which walls are being built. That's not what we're about, or at least it's not what I'm about. That's the devastating impact of erroneous paradigms. I also learned, with thanks to Covey at the Realization Conference in 2007, that we're to live life in crescendo. The best is yet to come. So I prefer to focus on where I'm being led rather than where I've come from. And I invite you to consider the same, to explore the journey, the road that you have chosen. Savor it. And don't forget to take each moment as a gift. Dwell in the moment. Do not be ahead or behind the moment. It's too easy to always be thinking of what's the next moment? Where am I going now? And forget that the moment is a gift. If you don't stop, if you don't treat the moment as a gift, you find it doesn't work. You have to be in the moment. And that way, a certain peace comes. We were often asked, if this is the solution, what's the problem? So if the TOCTP is a solution, what's the problem? Well, it has to be a significant one for this to be the solution. Not, and I hope I've got the spelling roughly right, a chukchik. And if the spelling's wrong, well, that is a chukchik. The answer is, of course, unique to each one of us. For me, personally, it's that personal FRT, which is the lens through which I can see the CRT that lies heaviest on my heart. And the cloud teaches me how to capture and understand what I see through that lens. What was and is and will be the problem that the TOCTP solves for me? I need this injection called the TOCTP so that I can interpret and understand the world in which I live with all its issues and its problems, and especially now on a one-to-one basis, do something about it. And so, my journey, which began many years before I ever knew about TOCTP, was brought into sharp focus by what Ellie and others taught me. You've seen some of that here today. This is just a snapshot, folks. And my journey is far from over and remains to be completed. But I do not travel alone. And I have the giants for more than just a world of TOC to keep me from straying, relying on them to whisper words of comfort and, most importantly, words of correction in my ear. Thank you. I'm assuming that there are still people out there listening. Hello? Any questions? Hello?
Oh, sorry. My mic was off. Hello. Yeah, there are people there, and there are a few questions. There was the.
I was just a little worried there. I thought nobody had actually been listening, and there's no way I was going to do it again.
No. That there are people, but there was the comment from Katie Austin about this chaos theory, that it was in 92 or 93, that you even had to ask, somebody had to ask to Ellie, like, moo, Ellie, about the chaos theory, yes?
Yeah.
There are several questions.
Okay.
Let's I don't know. So maybe there is a question from Richard. Richard, can you say more about why someone needs to be taught TP? Why studying a book is not sufficient?
Good question. In my experience, reading a book, nobody else is involved. You're making your own assumptions about what you've read. You're making your own assumptions about how you understand it and how you seek to use it. It's like learning French without actually ever visiting France. You don't know that you've got it right until you go to France. Or more importantly, do you want a brain surgeon that's only ever read the book and hasn't actually spent time studying how to do brain surgery? You know, you kind of get to choose on this one. For me, attending class where your own assumptions and your own understanding are laid bare, at least to the tutor, is fundamental to being able to have confidence in the use of the tools. It's as simple as that. Will a book help? Of course. If you want to read mine, why wouldn't I say that? But I'm not the only one, and there are many good books out there. But to my mind, you can never learn the TOC just by reading a book and thinking you can go and do it. Not the TP. You can get enough from the book, the goal, to go and do it yourself. That's a practical application. But it's not the way to learn a TP, in my view.
And there is a comment from Katie as well about that it is very difficult to see where our own assumptions are invalid.
I would entirely agree with Katie on that one. Whenever you ask people to surface assumptions, they always discount the ones that they're already convinced are okay. And then you say, well, how do you know it's okay? Well, it's my assumption. I said, but the word assumption suggests that it's an assumption and not a fact. And they go, yes. And then there's a silence. That's about it, really. Neeraj, I don't know how you can do this, but some people are listening and are struggling to know how to put questions into you. Would you just be able to let people out there know so that they can see how they're supposed to do it?
It should be the box called questions.
Right.
So you just type your questions in that box.
Oh, good. Thank you. I'm trying to, it's just come up on my messenger, and I thought rather than me say it, it's easier for you to say.
Yes, good. There is another question. Can you explain what paradigm lock is?
Yeah. Paradigm lock was a fairly lengthy assessment of what is the dominant barrier to change in most organizations. That's a pretty ambitious target, but it's what you do, I suppose. And basically, I was looking for something that would be active in a range of different organizations, in a range of different countries, and a range of different types, from people at different levels in organizations. So a very rich data set. And that's what I did. And basically, it comes down to this, that people have paradigms, a worldview about many, many, many things. But sometimes they'll have a worldview, let's say MRP2 scheduling or something of that ilk, or using not critical chain, but the standard methods of project management, or using cost accounting only as the only tool you can use to do everything. That's both report what you've done, but also to make decisions. What I found is that paradigm lock is where my paradigm, with respect to a specific issue, is at odds with a different paradigm, which if I want to change the way I am living my life, change the way I am leading my organization, I have to move from the paradigm which I have today, written in the D box, to the paradigm that I need to accept, implement, change, and so on in the D prime. And what you find is that it's the B box that is the most powerful for retaining an old paradigm, a paradigm that can now be superseded by a different one. And the B box says, I have to be in control over my life. And that can be interpreted as I am not prepared to change what I believe in this paradigm, which is written in the D box, at all. Therefore, I can never move to the other paradigm, which is in the D prime, which means I can never have the statement that's written in the C box, which I fully accept and in fact would like, which means I can never have the A box, irrespective of what's written in it. The B box becomes the goal because I cannot move from one paradigm to the other. And the key assumption there is no process to help me move from the paradigm in the D box to the paradigm in D prime. Now that's a very brief overview, and there's lots more stuff out there that you can read on it. But effectively, we find ourselves locked into a paradigm that is no longer correct. Kuhn speaks eloquently on KUHN, speaks eloquently on the whole concept of paradigms. You know, the Earth was flat for so many years. We all knew it. The sun went round the Earth. We all knew that. That's a typical paradigm, and people were put to death because they still felt that the Earth was actually not the center. It went round the sun. So the paradigm lock is this being trapped into a worldview which is now changed, discredited, moved on, whatever. That's the simplest answer.
Okay, thank you. There is a question from Jorge probably, sorry for wrong pronunciation. Besides of TOCTP, have you used any other coaching tools?
I've used a variety of different things. I know Meredith Belbin well, so I've used a lot of the Belbin stuff. I've used mind maps. I was fortunate to be given some training on mind maps by Tony Buzan many years ago. Used those. I came out of general systems theory, and my first degree with the Open University was in systems technology, systems engineering. And as a radar engineer, I was also I was looking at radar systems. So I've taken all those tools of systems engineering and so on forward and in. Today, I would also add things like what I've learned doing the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius and other approaches such as that, which help to inform and guide. It's an incredibly rich field, and there are so many tools out there. I've used Cattell, I've used 16PF, I've used other tools as well, and I find that they're all consistent and they help to guide. But what is right at the top of my list is, if I have a problem of clarity, I will use some of the other tools. If I don't have a problem of clarity, in other words, I have sufficient clarity and the person I'm working with or the organization I'm working with has sufficient clarity, then I may not use it. It's kind of, if I need it, I've got more tools in my toolbox. And the more tools you have, the better you are. But again, same rules apply. You're going to have to master those tools as well. Don't play games with them.
Okay, thank you. There is the question from Rebecca. Can you explain why you feel there is no long-term success in TOCTP selling?
In organizations, I'm basing that really on not just my own research and experience, but also what I've come across in many, and I haven't been to some for a while now, in many implementations around the globe. Every single company that we work on, or work in rather, is dependent on the leaders of that organization, the owners of that organization, remaining consistent with what we're trying to do with them. If the owner changes, we are no longer perhaps in the loop, and they will come in with a different paradigm, a different view of how they're going to run the plant. And if we don't have access to the company that we were working with, and the other company is much bigger, then maybe what we've done won't stay. A lot of work has been done in the health service in the UK and beyond. But it's really only as good as the people who remain in the organization to create a sense of stability. One of the biggest issues that I think TOC has had to face over the years is, you can do the what to change, you can do the what to change to, you can do the how to effect the change. How do you maintain and develop and grow a business when you might find that the people you're working with no longer share what you're doing? And that happens continually. Quite a number of the companies that I've worked in, both large and small, have been sold off to others to raise money. That's happened a couple of times. Or have been bought by a bigger company thinking, this is a great company, they're really doing well, and they come in. But of course, they make a small British company getting bought by an American multinational. You know, if they were using throughput accounting before, there's no guarantee they'll be allowed to do it afterwards. That's what I'm getting at. And by long term, what am I talking? I'm not talking 4 or 5 years. I'm talking 10, 15, 20 years. We have to recognize that the roots that we put down are only as good as the people we're working with have the opportunity to do so. What I didn't know this to begin with, but what I picked up about 5, 6 years into doing TOC, certainly by the turn of 2000, 2001, was you can help a company move forward. That's not a problem. Most of the people that have kept in touch with me, I helped them on their career, on their journeys, on their understanding of where they were going. That's why I found, for me, the most rewarding place to work in is one-to-one with people in organizations or people who just find their way to me. Maybe it's different in the Eastern economies. I don't know. But certainly my view on the Western economies, dominated as they are by cost metrics and efficiency measures and so on, all of which we're more than familiar with, and we all have the scars. That's too dominant a paradigm for me to bother. I don't have the stamina to address that particular paradigm. And today, I don't have the interest either. I'm making it as a general statement. I'm more than happy to be proved wrong. In fact, I would love to be proved wrong on that one, but I don't think I am going to be in the short term.
Great, thank you. Then there are more and more questions, so maybe we will. Adrian is asking, would it be correct that defining UD is correctly is the first step?
Fundamentally, yes. I usually ask what in spin selling are called situation questions. I don't understand an UDI until I know the context it's in. So I will usually start by saying, can you tell me a little bit, if it's one-to-one, can you tell me a little bit what you're doing, who you are, and so on and so forth. In an organization, you know, what marketing, what's going on here. These are what I call situation questions. It's so I can interpret the UDI in the context of the environment in which that UDI exists. If I don't have that context, I can't connect the UDI to the rest of the environment in which it appears, because I don't have it. So yes, it is the starting point of what I would describe the hard part. It's the P part of spin, the problem analysis. But I need those situation questions. And if I do the situation questions right, I shouldn't have to go back to them at a later point, either in the selling or in the teaching or in the implementation phase. I've kind of got that. So yeah, do your situation stuff. Make sure you understand the context. Things like, you know, well, what is the goal? What is it you're trying to achieve? What are you trying to do? Tell me a little bit about yourself. Let them talk. Because in the talking, actually, they start to reveal some of the UDIs anyway. And then you say, well, okay, let's look at the problems and issues that you're having to deal with. And that's my entry point to the UDIs. But for my mind, it's always starting there. The TP allows you to start wherever you might find yourself. But if I'm doing an analysis, then I usually start with that, because it's the foundation of what I might be doing.
Thank you. Then there are still questions, but probably, okay. So, should we call, somehow Mike, Odette's mic is not working, so I will try to connect.
No, can you?
Oh.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes,
I can hear you,
Odette.
Yeah. Okay, I think it's time to finish. We will collect the rest of the questions and we'll send them to Ted, get his answers and put it on the web. Thank you very much, Ted.
Thank you, Odette, for the invitation. And Yelena?
This was great.
Thank you, Ted. So, well, this is right now just information for everybody. If you have questions still that you would ask Ted to answer, please send them at yelena@tocexpert.com and we will forward them to Ted. Or you may send your questions to Nereus to the same email address that you saw in the invitation to join the webinar. And so just we thank Ted very much for just having this great time with us, for the outstanding story. Ted, thank you very much.
Thank you again. Thank you.
Yeah, and just there were the several questions regarding the presentation itself. I mean the slides. So
yeah,
we will send the information, and the information will be also on TOC Practice, and just we'll send the information how and when it will be available.
okay,
so
that's good.
it will be available within a few days. So just the slides
I have sent you about 2 hours ago the final draft.
Yes, excellent. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So just we will all the technicalities just will sort out, and we will let everybody know how and where they can get the slides. There is a special page on TOC Practice. Just please see it on the main menu. Just it says webinars on TOCPA, www.tocpractice.com. There is on the main menu, just on the upper bar, there is a tab which says webinars, and it presents the write-ups of all the upcoming webinars. And we will put the questions and answers there, and we will just put the link to the material there. So, and we will have the next webinar on the 19th October. It is Thursday. And it will be my webinar on insights into handling people's yes, but this is also the TP. We will send information. We will put information on TOCPA Facebook page, and we will send the mail blast, and we will put information on TOC practitioners worldwide. Well, thank you everybody for being with us, and well, until the next time. Nerius, thank you very much.
Thank you, and see you next time.
See you on the 19th.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.